and welcome to an Elderwatch web series. This time we're talking about financial tools to protect your identity and your money. And today's topic is, what's a credit freeze? Let's get into it. This presentation is brought to you by Elderwatch Colorado. Elderwatch is a 20-plus year collaboration between AARP and the Colorado Attorney General's Office. We work to protect and educate older Coloradans in the realms of fraud and financial literacy. So if you or someone you know has been the victim of fraud or a scam, or following this presentation, you want some more information on some financial tools to help keep you safe, go ahead and give us a phone call. Our phone number is 800-222-4444, select option 2. My name is Jessica Zawadsky, and I am the program specialist for Elderwatch Colorado. This video is one in a 4-part series. The other topics that we're going to cover in this series are what's a credit report, what's a fraud alert, and then we've also talked about what is check systems and / what is a consumer report. But today we're talking about credit freezes, which I love. So today we'll talk about first, what does the data say on credit freeze usage? Then we'll talk about what actually is a credit freeze. We'll talk about how a credit freeze is different from a fraud alert. We'll talk about how to place a credit freeze, and then we'll also talk about how to thaw a credit freeze. We will end by talking about how a credit freeze can help protect your identity and financial health. Elderwatch recently conducted a survey on fraud and financial literacy as well as financial health, and we found in this survey that was Coloradans 18 plus being surveyed that only about 26% of people have used a credit freeze. And that's only up 4% from 2020 when it was only 22% of people. The leading reasons that people have not used credit freezes, besides I don't know as a reason, were 1, they'd never heard of it before. 2, they didn't know how to set it up. And 3, they didn't understand why this is a useful and important tool. So I am hoping, among other things, to answer those 3 questions in this presentation today and really illustrate why this free tool is super duper important for protecting your identity and financial health. Okay, so what is a credit freeze? Very simply put, a credit freeze prevents new lines of credit from being opened with your name, social security number, and other personal information. What is actually happening behind the scenes is, let's pretend you are coming to Zawadsky Motors and you are trying to finance a car. So before I issue you an auto loan, I'm going to need to figure out whether I think you're going to pay me back or not. And to do that, I might pull your credit report or want your credit score. Now, if you place a credit freeze, it prevents me at Zawadsky Motors from pulling your credit report. And if I can't pull your credit report, I'm not going to issue you a line of credit. So essentially, that's how it works. A credit freeze prevents a potential lender from accessing your credit report. And because they can't access your credit report, it prevents new lines of credit from being opened under your name. When it comes to these financial tools, some of them are kind of similar, or you use them for similar reasons. And so credit freezes and fraud alerts are 2 that sometimes people confuse with one another. So a credit freeze prevents any new lines of credit from being opened under your name. And in the process, you have to place it with each credit bureau. So if I place the credit freeze with TransUnion, it does not freeze my credit with Equifax or Experian. Now, a fraud alert, on the other hand, tells lenders that you may have been the victim of identity theft, and so it pushes them to take extra verification steps before approving you for new lines of credit. In terms of the process, for a fraud alert, you only have to place a fraud alert with one bureau for it to apply to all 3. So in conjunction, dream team. You can have a credit freeze and a fraud alert, and they're really helpful because they work in slightly different ways to protect your identity. Now, the thing that they have in common, besides being tools to protect your identity, are that they are free tools and that you are doing them through the credit bureaus. So that's Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. Although for the freeze, you have to place a freeze with all three. And then for the fraud alert, you only have to place a fraud alert for one for it to apply to all three. So if you're ready to place a credit freeze, I think it's a great idea. I, knock on wood, have not been the victim of identity theft, but at this point, we've pretty much all been exposed in a data breach, and I'm not trying to apply for a new line of credit. So I have credit freezes on all of my accounts. In a second, we'll talk about how to unfreeze them or thaw that freeze. So it's a pretty easy tool to turn on and off, which is why I think everyone should have one, unless you're actively applying for new lines of credit. So how do you actually do this? To place a credit freeze, I think it's easiest to do online, but what you'll have to do is you'll have to go to each of the three credit bureaus. You will need to make an account. You might need to answer some security questions, but after you have that account, you pretty much just toggle to turn it on. If you can't find it on the web page where it says credit freeze, a quick tip is if you press Control F, it will allow you to text search the website, and so it'll help you find where that credit freeze button is. Now, you can also call the three credit bureaus to explore this option. Their numbers are listed on this slide. They are Equifax at 888-298-0045, Experian at 888-397-3742, and TransUnion at 800-916-8800. And as a reminder, you will have to go to each of the bureaus to place an individual credit freeze for each of them. Now, if you do need to apply for a new line of credit, this is when you would want to thaw your credit freeze. And it's really easy to do online. If you are going to, for example, come to Zawadzki Motors and you have that credit freeze, I would recommend thawing it maybe like half an hour before you get to the application process. And then after I've at Zawadzki Motors have run your credit report, you can just toggle it right back on. But to thaw that credit online, you will again go to each of the three credit bureaus. You'll log into the account that you now have, and then pretty much there's just a button you click that says unfreeze or thaw. Now, if you're going to do this on the phone, which at the time of this recording, you may be able to, you may not be able to, depending on your specific situation, you will again have to call each of the three credit bureaus. And I would probably allow for a longer lag time if you're going to do it over the phone. As I mentioned before, at this point in time, the majority of us have had our data exposed in a data breach, whether it was when one of the credit bureaus got hacked or all of the phone providers pretty much have been hacked. It's not really an if you're in a data breach, it's a when you're going to be in a data breach. So that's part of why credit freezes are wonderful, because if you freeze your credit, it prevents new lines of credit from being opened without your consent, without your knowledge, but using your personal information. Now, placing a credit freeze will not prevent a new bank account from being opened with your information. And that's when we get into consumer reports and check systems. So still definitely recommend placing the credit freeze, super important, but just know that if your identity has been compromised, there might be additional steps we need to take to make sure that we secure everything. And that's a wrap for today. Thank you for joining me to learn a little bit more about credit freezes, and hopefully next time we do that research survey, we will be significantly higher. I'm shooting for in the 50s. I want half of all Coloradans to understand and place a credit freeze. The other things we'll be covering in this financial tools web series include credit reports, fraud alerts, and check systems / consumer reports, which I just mentioned on that last slide. But thank you for joining me. Don't forget to call us. Don't be a stranger if you have any questions related to fraud and financial literacy, specifically in Colorado. Our phone number is 800-222-4444, select option 2. My name's Jessica Zawadzki. For all of us here at Elder Watch, thank you so much for joining me. I hope that these tools help you stay safe, and we'll see you next time.